When Johann Hoch became a media sensation in 1905, reports of other swindles, marriages, and murders over the previous decade came in from all over. But many of these crimes had been reported when they first happened, leaving us with a wealth of contemporary data and accounts, if you know where to dig. Today we dig into Hoch's arrival in the United States and his first two murders. This is Tomb Snoopers. Alright, so welcome once again to Tomb Snoopers. I'm Adam Salzer.
I'm Patty Vasquez.
And we are digging deep into history, specifically right now to the history of a guy who came to be known as Johann Hoch. Mm-hmm. This was, he's known in a book I have out now called Chicago's Serial Husband. He was suspected of marrying as many as 55 women. I can verify about 20 of those, but there's probably more that I couldn't find.
Amazing. This is crazy.
So, we're going to start with his American career. Now, I think that he first came to the States in 1895, when he was in about his mid-30s. Now, there were some suggestions that he had been here years before so he could work with H.H. Holmes. I don't think that's the case. One thing is that he never relented on saying he didn't come to the States until 1895. Usually, with his lies, he would slip up sooner or later.
Okay, so that was consistent.
Yeah. He was consistent on that one. I don't know of any solid data that he was here before then. But we're going to go back to Wheeling, West Virginia is where he showed up first, of all places.
Okay.
And I have no idea why he picked Wheeling, West Virginia, of all places. Possibly like just somebody he met on the ship said, hey, I've got a line on something in Wheeling, come on with me.
Okay.
But so in 1892, there was a guy whose name was Adolf Hoch, but probably Johann Adolf Hoch, who was working in a factory there. He was married to a woman named Carolyn. Carolyn Muller was her maiden name. And one morning in 1892, he woke up just screaming and writhing in agony. So Carolyn rushed for a doctor. The doctor said he was dying, so she rushed and brought in a lawyer, to whom he very quickly dictated a will. Now, I've actually got a copy of the will here, and it is full of all this legalese, things such as, I first commend my immortal being to him who gave it and my body to earth to be buried with as little expense or as may be necessary. Secondly, I will and bequeath to my beloved wife, Catherine, all of my estates. Like, if you're writhing around in agony and death throes...
It's pretty detailed.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this was translated into legalese by the lawyer, but I question whether he said any of this stuff. They quick write up the will. Everybody knew it was all going to go to Carolyn anyway. Nobody would have doubted that. But having the paperwork was probably good. And then down at the bottom, it's also signed Adolf Hoch X his mark, which means he wasn't writing it himself. He may have signed it with an X, if he was literate to begin with. Now, there's a fun thing in it that the next day the newspapers all agreed that he had died of drinking ice water.
Oh, is this something...
This was something people believed at the time. Like Dr. Benjamin Rush, one of our founding fathers, said that every summer 5 or 6 people a day dropped dead in Philadelphia because they drank ice water.
Okay, because what they thought there was something...
Yeah, it would do something...
It
would shock the system, yeah. There's a story that when the first shipment of ice was brought to New Orleans one summer, I mean, they'd seen ice on the river in the wintertime, but they wouldn't have thought to add it to their drinks then. Mm-mm. But the mayor had it melted down immediately, like thrown in the river, because if people tried to drink it, it would be too dangerous.
What?
This gave the newspapers a chance to say the factory should really just let the men drink nice, healthy beer on their breaks.
Well, I mean...
this was a largely German neighborhood in Wheeling, West Virginia. And, well, Adolf had been married to a woman named Carolyn, and left her with quite a bit of property. He owned a building, she had quite a bit of money in her bank account, and enough that she didn't really have to worry for a while. For a few years, she didn't try to find another husband, as far as we know, and according to the people in the neighborhood, probably wouldn't have had that easy a time anyway. It's like one thing, it's weird reading like reminiscences of her neighbors saying, well, she was not an attractive woman.
Oh, dear.
She was blind in one eye. She was respectable, but not attractive.
Oh.
So
it's always been like this.
Yeah, it's the 1890s for you, especially.
A little judgy.
Yeah, very judgmental. But then, in January of 1895, a stranger came to town.
Dun, dun, dun.
Isn't this always how the story goes? A guy calling himself Jacob Hoch. Now, I have gone through German language newspapers for this one. And I don't speak German, but, you can, and with the old style characters in there, trying to translate it with, like, Google Translate or something, only goes so far, but I can often get the gist of it enough to know if I should ask somebody who speaks German better to translate it. And there was, in January of 1895, a list of departures from the port. And it includes Jacob Schmidt, Jacob Schmidt of Horweiler, which would have been him. There was also a guy on the list named Jacob Huff.
Okay.
So he must have just picked the name off of one of the other passengers. But he made his way to Wheeling, West Virginia somehow and opened up a saloon. They got a saloon license. There's a record of getting the saloon license. It was published in the Wheeling Register February 6th of 1895. So people who knew him said he opened up this saloon. Everybody thought he was way too free with credits. Like he must be covering up some kind of big game. This all must be some kind of money laundering scheme.
Okay.
But they liked him partly because, well, the word that comes up over and over is people call him fascinating. And that would come up across his various wives. I mean, people would just explain why they were so drawn to this man. He was fascinating. And around the bar, he was telling everybody that he was a survivor of the Elbe shipwreck. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. The ship was ELBE, like the Elbe. It had sailed in January of 1895. It sailed from Bremen and sank, killing about 200 people. There was just a tiny list of survivors. This was a big enough news story that it made all of the Wheeling newspapers at the time. All the ones I was able to get. I'm sure there were some that I hadn't, but there were enough online that I was able to get really about all the data I could use. But this is one thing. Maybe somebody listening out there has access to some microfilm reels out in Wheeling, West Virginia. If you live near the Wheeling Library or something, they might have some that haven't been digitized and might have more interviews with the neighbors.
So there might have been, so is this the kind of thing where he might have, knowing that people were talking about it since it was in the paper, grabbed onto it?
Yeah, he grabbed on and told everybody, yes, I was one of the survivors of that shipwreck. And from what I could see, none of the Wheeling papers listed all of the survivors. And even then, this was probably a month or so after the fact. Not like anybody still had a newspaper from a month ago sitting around. So it would be very hard to fact check this kind of stuff. But really, one thing we can see is he got the application of the saloon approved on February 6th. The ship had gone down about a week before. Okay. There is no way that he would have made it all the way to Wheeling, West Virginia that quickly. But that was his story, and people just never really questioned it. But one guy who met him early on was a guy named Reverend Herman Haas. He was the pastor of the Lutheran church there, and he said, as soon as I met the guy, I didn't trust him. He didn't look you right in the eye. And there was just something about it. It was like, come on, pastor. Shouldn't you be a little more open-minded than this?
But, I mean, presumably he got a feeling for maybe where the stories he would tell about being from Germany didn't ring true or whatever.
Yeah, he said that he noticed him. One time he said he was from one town, and one time he said he was from another. He never stopped believing that Hoch had been on the Elbe shipwreck, though.
Really?
10 years later, he was talking to reporters and told them all about, he was on the Elbe, that ship that went down.
So even though he didn't trust him, he still believed the lie.
Right, he still believed quite a bit of the stuff. And he became it's possibly why they were able to eventually capture him. But he didn't like him, but he just sat and watched while Hoch entertained people by joining all the German singing societies and playing the zither. By many accounts, he loved to play the zither. Later, the newspapers would suggest he was using the zither to hypnotize people. So they love talking about hypnosis in the newspapers.
It's enchanting.
Yeah, it comes up a lot in court records, the idea of hypnosis. And sometimes they talk about it like it's a scientific thing. Sometimes it does really sound more supernatural. But this was a time when people didn't really know what to make of this whole hypnosis thing. And it came up quite a bit. Hoch's own lawyer in a previous case had tried to get permission to hypnotize his client just to show how easy it was to hypnotize this guy. So he wasn't responsible for the murder he helped with. He'd been hypnotized into doing it.
Convenient.
Yeah, this just came up over and over back then. Newspapers loved it. It always sold well.
Of course.
And the courts took it more seriously than you'd think. So Hoch eventually met Carolyn, And everybody said they were surprised that such a handsome and fascinating man would go after a woman who was blind in one eye and not very attractive, but she had money. Mm-hmm. And everybody kind of knew, or later claimed to know, that that was what he was after the entire time. So they got married fairly early on. Hoch opened up a whole new saloon and started talking about his plans to build this giant beer garden and concert hall. And I tried to figure out exactly where all this was. It was an area called Boggs Run, right on the banks of the Ohio River in Wheeling, West Virginia. I didn't go so far as to go to Wheeling to check this place out, but, we've got Google Street View, so I could at least take a look around. And the area is full of older buildings that look like they haven't been painted since 1895. And a lot of them, some of them could be like one of the beer gardens where he went to, one of the houses where he lived. And they're all looking in really rough shape now. A lot of them are on sale for like less than $20,000 last I looked.
Oh my God.
And yeah, it's there's some interesting opportunities there, I imagine. Once again, if you're out there in Wheeling, West Virginia listening in.
I was going to say, you might make that into a very popular real estate market.
Yeah, so they moved to the suburbs. He bought another beer garden, and then Carolyn began to get sick.
What?
And massive surprise. Surprise.
Sorry, Carolyn.
She started getting sick. Neighbors who visited said that there might be something up. A couple of doctors came in, and one of them even suggested that they thought Carolyn was being poisoned. When they talked about it amongst themselves, said, "Don't tell anybody a word of this. We would get in so much trouble." They thought they'd get mixed up into it. But the Reverend, in particular, kept going and thinking that something was wrong. And then one day he got the message that Mrs. Huff had died. So he went to the house as, part of his duties as the pastor. He had performed the marriage ceremony despite whatever misgivings he may have had, walked there and found that Mr. Huff was not at home, but the body was lying on the bed. So we walked down the street to the barber shop and saw that he was getting a haircut and a shave. And as soon as the Reverend walked in, he said Jacob started making a big show out of crying. And then they went back to the house, and he was kissing the corpse. And he said, "It was at that moment I began to bitterly hate that man."
Interesting.
And started looking into what that medicine was. And it had all of the medicine bottles had been destroyed by then. So he started making inquiries and found that, right away, after Carolyn died, this Jacob Huff character was going around to her various bank accounts and drawing out the money, which was not as easy as people think it was. People think now that if women could have bank accounts at all, the husband immediately had access to them. And it's really not the case. This comes up a lot. All of these women had bank accounts, almost all of them in this story. And Hoch marrying them didn't automatically get him access to the accounts. He would have to talk them into making a withdrawal or trick them into making a withdrawal somehow. But in this case, when she had first gotten sick, he had her draw up a new will. Which could be accessed online. All the West Virginia wills are online. And this one, it lacks all of the flowery language of Adolph's. There's nothing about it. It's not like my beloved husband or anything. But it makes it clear that he would get all of the property and all of the money. The will had not been filed yet, but it was enough just to have the will. He could go to the bank and say, "My wife died, here's her will. Gimme." And managed to clear quite a bit of money off of this by all accounts. But the Reverend was still getting suspicious. There was a lot of whispering around the neighborhood that something was suspicious about this whole thing. And then there was even a rumor that after she was buried at a place called Red Man's Cemetery, like the Red Men was a group like the Oddfellows or the Masons, one of those fraternal organizations, the Shriners. And she was buried next to her first husband at Red Man's Cemetery. And
really?
Yeah. Huh? Yeah, the first husband who had died of drinking ice water or whatever the natural cause was. And there was a rumor that the grave had been disturbed, too. Like somebody might have dug the body up.
Whoa.
So while these rumors were going around, one day Hoch, Haas, the Reverend, was having dinner and heard a sound going on upstairs. So he went up and found there was Jacob Huff, the one we now know as Johann Hoch.
He
broke in and said, "Oh, I was just looking for you."
Upstairs.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then he's like, "Yeah, well, I was down there. Get out." And at that point, as soon as he had him out of the house, the Haas said, "I immediately threw away all of my medicines, like anything that he could have tampered with." Then I realized it was a big mistake. He should have kept it so it could be tested. Mm-hmm. But he had gotten rid of it. And about a day later, the clothing of Jacob Huff was found on the banks of the Ohio River.
Oh, just
he had made it look like he had committed suicide or died by suicide by jumping into the river. And this is the newspaper article about it that was in the Wheeling Register. The headline, "It deceived nobody."
Fantastic.
So this was, everybody knew, like, the clumsy attempt of Jacob Schmidt, alias Jacob Huff, to induce the public to believe he has committed suicide. He left his old clothes on the shore of the island, donned a new suit, and bought a ticket for Chicago. Something about the record of the man here and elsewhere. The authorities should act. So,
man,
among the things that he left behind was a pocket watch that had the name on the inside scratched off, but if you held it to the right angle, you could still read that it said Jacob Schmidt Horweiler. So
another name. Here we go.
Another name. So this is what induced Reverend Haas to write to the authorities in Horweiler, Germany, this tiny little town. Sometimes they said he was from Bingen on the Rhine, which is the next tiny little town over about 30 miles away. These are each towns of like 300-400 people, so everybody would have known everybody. He wrote to the authorities there, sending him a picture of Hoch and Carolyn's wedding photo, which I don't think survives now. There's a couple of very murky, like, reconstructed versions where they've drawn the outfits, they've drawn the people sitting there, but pasted their faces onto the faces.
Okay.
It was like a composite that they put together in the papers. I don't know why they didn't just run the real one.
Yeah, really.
But partly it was probably just wasn't in good enough shape.
So go with what you have.
Yeah, go with what they have, or try to make, retouching photos to make them presentable was something they did all the time. Everybody knew. I don't know how aware of it most people were, but you could go to school to learn to retouch newspaper photos. It wasn't like early Photoshop. It wasn't like they kept it a secret, but I don't know how many people were totally aware of it. So he sent word to the authorities in Horweiler, and they sent back a couple of photographs that established that, yes, this is a man named Jacob Schmidt, and here's the name of his parents. He recently fled from Germany after, like, stealing a bunch of bad debts. He had a bunch of, like, barrels of barley that he was supposed to be taking to sell someplace, and instead just sold them off and disappeared. And was covered in bad debts, had left behind a wife and a few children, and so thereafter, he was already said to have been in Chicago. They kind of knew where he was.
Was Chicago like a destination for some of these ne'er-do-wells to come to? I mean, were we a bit of a magnet?
That's definitely what the newspaper said at the time. Like, just a couple of years before, when Mayor Harrison was running for office again, the Chicago Journal said that if that guy wins, with the World's Fair coming up, every thief, every murderer, every pickpocket is going to flock to Chicago, knowing it's going to be a wide-open town. And they refrained from saying, "I told you so," when Mayor Harrison was assassinated towards the end of the fair. And I often point this out, but incidentally, the very same day the Journal was saying that, the Chicago Tribune was running their first article about H.H. Holmes and this building he had where he was hiding stolen furniture in rooms where he'd, like, wallpapered over the doors, which is where some of the secret passage stories come from.
Yeah.
So
wild.
Definitely it had a reputation. We were right on all the train lines. It was an easy place for somebody to disappear.
And now we're on all the highway lines, which leads to other issues. Anyway.
Right. So
we digress.
We digress. But everybody figured out immediately she had to have been murdered at this point. Mm-hmm. And they started saying, maybe we should dig that body back up. And then they decided, no, she was probably embalmed with arsenic anyway. Right. I don't know if they thought of that at the time, but for some reason, nothing ever really came of it. They never decided, they never brought him back, at least not at the times. This was all summer of 1895. He would have arrived in Chicago right when the Holmes building was being investigated. And this was July of 1895, late July. There was about a 10-day period when the police they had found a couple of bodies of children that H.H. Holmes had murdered in Toronto. And at that point, people remembered, hey, this guy had a building back in Chicago that was full of hidden rooms and secret chambers. They thought of that before in November, the previous November, when he was first arrested. But they thought, didn't this guy have a building that was supposed to be full of hidden rooms? Should we investigate that? And then they just went, nah.
Oh my God. Wow.
But then the next July, when they found the bodies in Toronto, they remembered again and spent a few weeks with the cops just going through saying, we found a rope, he must have been hanging people, or we found this bench, could that have been a dissection table? And just running their mouths off. But this is what would have been front page every day when Johann Hoch arrived in Chicago. And he's like
the glory land for him.
Yeah. So he got there, bought himself a saloon on Western Avenue. It's pretty close to where Margie's Candies is now. if you've ever been there.
Really?
Yeah, like right about like Western and Armitage area.
All right.
It's kind of difficult to determine because the everything was renumbered in 1909, so whatever address they gave then isn't going to be the right address now. There's a renumbering guide, but it's not foolproof.
Right.
Especially when we've got an address from like 1895, not from 1908, right before they changed it. So he got a saloon and just started talking to people, and the reminiscences of people there, it sounds like he was just flush with power. He had gotten away with murder, and he knew it. And
confidence.
he was just, he was bragging to everybody. He told one of his customers at the bar that I am actually a chemist. I could do things with chemistry that would make your hair stand on its end. And he talked a lot about how much he hated women.
Oh.
Which
seems clear from his...
it kind of seems clear from it, but this wasn't something he really traded in quite as often later on. I mean, he went from persona to persona. Some of these personas were really down on women, some of them were not, all depending on what he thought the situation called for. What his real personality was, who even knows,
sure,
if he had one at all. So he started telling people, I am looking around to find a wife. And one of them suggested, well, how about my cousin, Julia Steinbrecher? She's a widow. She's got a ton of money.
Oh, boy.
And she had thousands of dollars and quite a bit of property. And very quickly, Hoch was engaged to her. And he was now using the name Johann Hoch, which was his previous wife's first husband. This was a pattern that he would stick with quite a bit. A lot of times, he would kill a person, then not only take their money and property, but take the name of their previous husband. This is a pattern that he stuck with throughout. There's only one name he used that I can confirm that I don't know of a particular source for. And Johann Hoch was the first one he used when he came to Chicago, or Johann Adolf Hoch. And he went back to it just kind of unexpectedly about 10 years later. It's the name that eventually, when he was captured, it was the name that he was using. It was after that he would answer to no other name. Once reporters got wind of his backstory at the time, they realized, okay, they tried to call him Jacob Schmidt for a couple of days, but it just didn't stick. He ended up being Johann Hoch. He's John Hoch in the burial records. So I've just kept up with calling him Johann Hoch. Now one thing we could point out about the name, too, is most of the rewrites about him call him Johann Otto Hoch.
Why
and
Otto? Oh,
Otto. I don't even know where that... like O-T-T-O.
Sure, you're right.
And I can't really find that before the 1970s. I don't know where that came from. One of his rumored aliases was Count Otto von Kern.
Oh my
but
God,
that one, I could actually debunk that one. There was a story going around that he married this woman under the name of Count Otto von Kern here in, I forget which town it was, and that was all over the press. But just in the local paper, the woman finally said herself, "Oh, that's just my sister talking. I did marry a man named Otto von Kern who took all my money and ran, but he never said he was a count, and he didn't look anything like this Johann Hoch guy." So we can probably let him off the hook for that one. But just the other day while I was on your radio show and during commercials, as an experiment, I went to one of those AI sites and asked, give me a biography of Johann Hoch, the serial killer. And it immediately called him Johann Otto Hoch. So he gets to word 2 before we get to a mistake. And eventually I just kept asking it, tell me where you found out his name was Johann Otto Hoch. And it would say the Chicago Tribune. Like, okay, which article in the Chicago Tribune? Because I couldn't find it in there.
Interesting.
And eventually I think it was scraping like Murderpedia or some site like that.
I was going to ask about that.
And guessed that they got that from the Chicago Tribune. But it couldn't cite a specific article. And what I got off of the AI engines was a pretty good summary of what you'd read about the guy on like crime encyclopedia stuff, and the way it's been rehashed as like a chapter in murder anthologies, including stuff that I've written over the years.
How weird is that? See that scraped in the AI.
Yeah, I've definitely had some of my books fed into training.
You're teaching AI.
Yeah, well, aren't we all? Whether we like it or not.
It's too late now.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
So he got to Chicago, started calling himself Johann Hoch, Johann Adolf Hoch, married this woman, Carolyn Steinbrecher, and lived with her a very short amount of time before she started getting sick. And she had a foster son, William Steinbrecher, who came to visit, and she pulled him close and said, "My husband is not what he's pretending to be. I believe he is poisoning me." And he just thought she was delirious at the time. But thereafter, he couldn't visit her anymore. Anytime that anybody tried to come visit Carolyn, the housemaid would say she's not taking visitors. She doesn't want to see anybody. She's not feeling well. And then, lo and behold, she died. Now, here's something that a discrepancy I noticed, like that foster son and some of the neighbors came by later, and all of them remembered that she had died. The official cause was gastritis. And they noticed that Hoch was in a real hurry to get her buried. Like she died one night and was buried the very next morning. There was even one account that as the procession was going to Graceland Cemetery, a pastor came and tried to stop them and said, something is wrong with this case. She told me she was being poisoned, but Hoch pulled out a death certificate that said she had died of gastritis, and they were allowed to proceed out to Graceland.
Look at the pastors trying to step in.
Yeah, they always were. Now, one thing I was able to find here was the burial receipt at Graceland Cemetery. That was they called her Mary Hoch by then. This is one of the confusion. Julia Steinbrecher is also Mary Hoch. But it gave a cause of death as diabetes.
Oh.
And then I found her death certificate. It also said diabetes. Like, how did people just forget this 10 years later and somehow remember that as being gastritis?
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe it was complications, or they told them it was the gastritis was commingled with her diabetes or something.
Was the diabetes something she would have been treated for a while?
Probably so, yeah. But we don't have records on her that far back. Gotcha. Nobody mentioned anything about her being diabetic. But in any case, the account said that it was a certificate signed by Dr. Grimm, which is an appropriate name. And that's actually what it says on the certificate, too. So as far as it can be fact-checked, the story all checks out.
I would not be going to a doctor called Dr. Grimm.
Yeah. So she was buried in an unmarked grave by a tree in the northeast corner of Graceland Cemetery. I was able to track down exactly where it was. Good view of the Target right nearby.
Well, I don't think that was a selling point at the time. Then.
No, but, well... It's an interesting thing, though, is arsenic is an element. It doesn't decompose down to anything else. So if the coffin was of sufficient quality, and there's no necessarily a reason to think that it was, but the arsenic that killed her is probably still buried in that cemetery, and probably still there.
Well,
if it hasn't seeped out of the coffin over the years.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that anybody would dig up. You'd have to have your own resources to do that.
I would imagine.
Do they? I mean, like, do they go through? If somebody like in the family, like descendants, would that be? Did she have? She only had the foster son.
I think she only had the foster son. I had some trouble finding genealogy stuff about her, really. But
and I mean, why would anybody want to?
Yeah, why would anybody want to?
Unless it's a historical person.
It also, it depends on what good quality the coffin was and how rushed it was. I doubt it's like a lead-lined coffin or anything like that, and it probably wouldn't have wanted it to be. But when it did come up in the press, they said, well, they determined that the undertaker had used an arsenic embalming fluid, so there was never going to be a conviction on it anyway.
That's right.
So that was his first case in Chicago. He got away with it, got an awful lot of money out of her, and then decided to do the same thing again. But the next time it didn't go quite as well, and we are just about running out of time for today, so we will cover that in the next episode here on Tomb Snoopers. Once again, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/tombsnoopers. Look us up on Facebook, look us up wherever podcasts are downloaded. We're going to have all kinds of cool stuff on here. And on the Patreon, we'll be posting things like I'll record some bonus episodes, I'll put up all this material. Even in the off-season, between seasons, I will keep on posting stuff on that. Come and join in the discussion and talk about, well, what else can we still find about this case? Even though I got the book written, you never know what still might turn up, what might be digitized, what I might find myself in wheeling and decide to dig up those other microfilm reels. You never know. So, all right, I'm Adam.
I'm Patty.
And we are Tomb Snoopers. We'll see you next time.
Woo-hoo.
This week's stories featured a ton of data that you'll be able to get on patreon.com/tombsnoopers. Ship manifest, contemporary newspaper accounts, photos, all sorts of things that we've covered, many of which have never been available online before. Patreon.com/tombsnoopers. Join the club for early access, supplemental material, and all kinds of cool bonuses.